Hi, this is Beersborn. Welcome back to Game Design. We're here in our side-scrolling game, and we're going to add a couple things in this video. First, we're going to replace this temporary sprite that we have for our main character with the sprites and the animations that we've created. We're also going to add the mechanics so that our character can attack. But to start, let's do the animations. I'm over here in the test layout, and I'm going to double-click on my main character sprite. I'm going to replace this temporary sprite with the one that I've created for my character's idle animation. So I'm up here in the top left, load images from files, and we want to find wherever we've exported our files. Here's my idle animation. Double click on that. Now there's a couple things we want to do with this idle animation. We should rename it. We want to be able to recognize which animation is which. So I'm going to change the name of this one to idle. We can also adjust the speed. I'm going to make mine a little faster. And we want to make this loop. We want the idle animation to play in a loop over and over again. You can click the play button, test it out. There's my idle animation. Maybe a little too fast. I'm going to turn down my speed a little. That all set up. Once you have that animation looking good, then we can add a second animation. This one's going to be our character's running animation. So we can rename it. I'm going to call it Run. I'm going to click on the folder up in the top left, find my running animation. Now, same thing with this. We want it to loop, and we might need to adjust the speed. You can always click the play button to test it out. Now let's do a third animation. This is going to be our attack 1. It's going to be our first attack animation. I'm going to click on the folder. I'm going to find my attack 1 animation. There it is. On this one, we can adjust the speed. We don't necessarily want this one to loop, though. We might just want to attack once and then leave it at that. So we can test that out. And let's add another animation. This one's going to be our run and attack animation. So I'm going to call this one attack and run. Here's my run and attack animation. Again, adjust the speed if you need to. We don't need this one to loop. And finally, let's add our attack 2. And I'm loading in my close range melee attack here. Those are the animations we're going to add for now. Let's go ahead and close our animations editor window. And we have to tell Construct when to use each animation. So I'm going to head over to my core event sheet. Now, right now, we don't have groups or anything. We should probably make some groups. Let's add a group down here. I'm going to right click down in the white space at the bottom. I'm going to click on add group. I'm going to call this group character movement. I'm going to put all the events that control my character's movement into that group. Now to do that, you can click and drag, drop it right where it says add event to character movement. You want to make sure you're clicking from the left tab here, and you want to make sure you drop right where it says the words add event to character movement. If you drag from somewhere else, you can mess stuff up. And if you drop it in the wrong spot, it can also mess stuff up. So you want to drop it right where it says add event to character movement. I'm going to throw my camera system in there too. So there's my character movement group. Let's make a group for the enemy 1. I'm going to call it enemy 1. I'll take anything to do with the enemy 1. You can also hold down shift and select more than one at a time. Drop them in there. And a group for enemy 2. I'm going to click on the top one. I'm going to hold down shift and click on the bottom one, select the whole group, drop them in there. Now these groups are important. They help us organize our events, but they're also going to come in handy because we can turn certain groups on and off, and that'll be useful for what we're about to do. But to start, let's go into our character movement group. I'm going to add some events here that control when the different animations play. So let's add an event to the character movement group. What this is going to say, it's going to say when our player is running, we should have the run animation play. When our player is not running, we should have the idle animation play. So for the condition, I'm going to go to player. And if I scroll down to the platform section, because we've added the platform behavior, we have all these options. And one of them is moving. So we can say if our player is moving, then the action should probably be the player set animation to our run animation. So whenever it's using the platform move behavior, the animation will be run. Now we can do the same thing again. We'll add an event, player, is moving, but this time we can right click and we can hit invert. And that'll mean when the player platform behavior is not moving, which is standing still, we'll add action, go to the player, and the animation should be the idle animation. Perfect. Now let's try that out. Hit play. Now we have some weird stuff going on. It's jumping around in a weird way. It's kind of glitching a little. The reason for that has to do over here in the test layout. If I double click on my character, we have to adjust the collision polygon. Now the collision polygon is this tool down here on the left side, and it represents where the body of our character is. And Construct does its best to try to guess where you want that to be, but it changes based on every frame and every animation. And that causes problems. We want to choose kind of a size and shape for our collision polygon. We want to keep it consistent. So what I recommend doing is going to the first frame of your idle animation, and let's just choose a simple shape. I recommend deleting. I'm clicking delete on my keyboard to get rid of some of these dots and just have a simple rectangle. I like to keep it nice and flat on the bottom, and I also like to keep it a little smaller than my character is, which makes it feel a little bit more forgiving to the player so they don't get hit by stuff as easily. That's pretty good. Once you have your shape, you can right click and you can hit apply to all animations. That'll make the same size and shape for every animation. Now, even things where it's running, where sometimes it's up higher than in other times, that's okay. It's good to keep that consistent. So have your shape the same across all the frames. Now when I hit play, a little bit more consistent. So I have my idle animation playing, and then when I'm moving, it plays the running animation. The only thing that's weird about that is that it doesn't face the right direction when I'm moving to the left. So let's fix that. I'm going to go into my core events, and I can use these events. I have when the D key is down, move my character to the right. When my A key is down, move my character to the left. I can also say when the A key is down, let's add another action, go to our player, and we can do set mirrored. Mirrored will reverse it horizontally. It'll make it face the opposite direction. So we can set mirrored. Good. Try that out. Moves to the right, moves to the left. But now it doesn't move back to the right. Now it's stuck in that direction. So we have to add an event to this one, or I'm sorry, an action to this one that says when the D key is down, add action, player, set mirrored, not mirrored. Perfect. That looks good. Now let's make it so our player can attack. I'm going to make a new group. I'm going to right click down here at the bottom. I'm going to add a group. I'm going to call this character attack. Let's also add mouse controls to our game. So far we've just used the keyboard. Let's make it so our player can use the mouse buttons to attack. And to do that, we're going to have to insert a new object. Whenever we want a new control, it has to act as a new object. So I'm going to insert new object, scroll down to the input section, and you'll see the option for mouse. I'm going to double click on mouse, and now I've added mouse controls to my game. So now back over my core events, I can add an event to the character attack group, and the condition is going to be when my player presses a button on the mouse. So I'm going to go to mouse. We have an option for on click, which means that if you just click the mouse button once, something will happen. Or you can do mouse button is down, which means that if our player holds down the button, it'll keep doing whatever that action is. I think this is a better option here because we can make it so that our player can hold down the mouse button and they'll just keep attacking over and over again rather than having to click every time they want to do an attack. So let's do mouse button is down. And we're going to choose which mouse button do we want to have our player press to shoot an arrow. I'm going to do the left button. So when the left button is down, I'm going to add an action. I'm going to go to my player, and I'm going to set the animation to be the attack 1 animation. Now, if I try that out, it doesn't work. When I go to press the button, it just kind of freezes up there. And the reason why, whenever you have a situation where it should be playing an animation, but it just kind of like stops, that's usually because in Construct, we're telling it to play 2 different animations at the same time. Right here, it's saying whenever the left mouse button is down, set the animation to attack 1. But up here, whenever it's not moving, set the animation to idle. Both of these conditions are true. And it's telling it to play 2 different animations. And it can't do that, so it just kind of breaks. What we need to do is we need to say, well, when we're doing the character attack here, we should make it so that we turn off all the movement stuff. There's different ways we can do that. I'll show you this way first, and then we'll do a different way for the next one. But this is an easy fix. If I add another action down here, and I go to the system, under system, there's an option for set group active. What set group active allows you to do is take any of the groups we've made, like in this case, the character movement group, and deactivate it. Select deactivate. What that does is it turns off all the events that are in this group when I'm doing this event. So if I press play now, when I go to attack, it turns off all the idle and everything. All these stuff that controls my movement, it just deactivates it. And now I can do my attack. And as long as I hold down my mouse button, it'll keep doing it. The only problem is when you're done attacking, I'm stuck, I'm frozen. I can't go back to moving. So we have to fix that. We also have to fix it so that when our attack animation finishes, it goes back to the idle animation. So for both of those things, I'm going to check when my animation is finished. When my attack 1 is done, then I can reactivate the character movement group and I can go back to my idle animation. So let's add an event. The condition is going to be when the player is finished or on finished, attack 1. When the animation is done, we'll add an action. We'll go to our system. We'll go to set group active. And we'll take our character movement group and activate it again. Turn all that stuff back on. Let's try that out. Great. So I can shoot, and then when it's done shooting, it goes back to being able to move around. Cool. Now, in this case though, I can't run and shoot my arrow at the same time. When I'm running and I click my mouse button to attack, it just pauses its run, which is good. I mean, you can. A lot of games have that. We can probably use that for our second attack. But we have an animation that shows our character running and attacking at the same time, right? So let's do that next. We're going to make it so that if our player's standing still when they press the attack button, they'll just stand still and attack. But if our player is running when they attack, it'll switch to the run and attack animation. So let's add an event for that. I'm going to say when the mouse button is down, left, and I'm going to add another condition over here. I'm going to say when the mouse button is down and if the player is moving. So now this will only happen if my player is running while the mouse button is down. Then I can add an action, go to my player, set the animation to attack and run. Now we need to change this too, because this is saying whenever the left mouse button is down, go to attack 1. So this should only be true when our player is not moving, right? So I'm going to add a condition over here. And I'm going to say player is moving, but in this case, invert it. So when the left mouse button is down and the player is not moving, it does attack 1. When the left mouse button is down and the player is moving, it does attack and run. Let's try that out. Now, it's not really going to work. It's going to do that same thing where it just kind of freezes. And the reason why is this. We're not going to deactivate the character movement group here because we want to keep our character able to run, right? That only works because it's standing still. But if I want to keep all this stuff active, what I have to do is I have to tell it should only play the run animation when it's not attacking. So I have to jump back up to my character movement group. I'm going to add another condition over here. This one says when the platform behavior is moving, set the animation to run. This one says when the platform animation is moving, set the animation to attack and run. So if I add another condition here, double click on the left side, and I say that this should only be true if my player go to is playing the attack and run, but right click invert it. Now these conditions say when the player is moving, but it's not playing the attack and run animation, then set it to just normal run. If it's moving and the left button is down, then set the animation to attack and run. Try that out. We'll see if it works. I think it will. There it goes. Now it does do something kind of weird. After it plays once, it just kind of gets stuck there. If you let go of the mouse button, it just kind of like glitches out there at the last frame. We need to add one more thing. We need to say when the attack and run animation's finished, go back to just the regular run animation. So I'm going to add another event. I'm going to say player on finished, attack and run. So when that animation finishes, rather than just stopping on the last frame of the attack and run, take our player, set the animation to just the normal run. Excellent. Cool, looks good. Now our next thing we're going to do is we're going to make it so that there's actually an arrow that comes out of my my character when he shoots the arrow. So we're going to have to add that in as its own object. Whenever we have a projectile that moves across the screen separately from our character, that's going to be its own object. So I'm going to right click, I'm going to insert a new object. It's going to be a sprite. I'm going to call it arrow. Click insert, click anywhere. Let's find the sprite that we've made for our projectile. Here's mine. It's an arrow. It's a lot of open space here. Now, when we have stuff that's not animated, like this does not have any animation to it. It's just a single frame. Sometimes I like to click this button that crops out the extra space. So that way it's just the sprite itself. I wouldn't recommend doing that with anything with a lot of complex animations though, because that can tend to make things a little messy. It tends to mess up the origin point and stuff. So let's just only do that if there's like a single frame and not something that has a bunch of other animations on it. There we go. It's just one frame. There's my arrow. It's pretty big. I'm going to have to size that down to make it fit. I can kind of just ballpark it for now. That's probably good. There's my arrow. Now this arrow, we need to give it a behavior to make it move. If I have it selected and I go over to the behaviors, I'm going to add a new behavior. I'm going to give it the bullet behavior. This is all stuff we've done in the previous project, so it might seem a little bit familiar. I'm going to give it the bullet behavior, and I can adjust the speed here. I'm going to make it move 800, and you can do stuff like at gravity or make it bounce or whatever you want it to do. Now let's go over to our event sheet. What we're going to say is that when our character performs the attack animation, spawn the projectile and make it fly out. One thing we might want to test actually, let's go over to our character and let's go to our attack animation. We want to see which frame of animation the projectile should actually come out on. Like on mine, I have all these anticipation frames, right? Where he's just like pulling the string back and he's anticipating the action. The action doesn't really happen until frame 5. So yours is probably different. You probably have less anticipation frames. I have a bunch. So mine's going to happen on frame 5. Yours might happen on frame 1. But I'm just going to keep that number in mind. I'm going to go over to the core event sheet, and I'm going to think about what are the conditions for when I want the arrow to come out. I'm going to add an event to character attack. I'm going to say, okay, the player has to be playing the attack 1 animation. So that animation should be happening, and it should be on a specific frame. So I'm going to double click, add another condition on the left, go to my player, compare frame, and then whatever frame you want to have it come out on. Mine's 5, yours might be something different. So whenever it's playing the attack and I hit frame 5, I'm going to add an action, go to my player, and have my player spawn another object. That object's going to be the arrow. Click done. Now it's going to be a little weird, but let's try it out. Every time it plays the attack, gets to frame 5, makes a bunch of arrows come out. There's like, I don't know, 8 different arrows firing out right there. And they're coming out kind of from the center of the body, which looks all right, but we can adjust that and make it come out from just the spot we want it to appear on. Now, number 1, the reason why it's making so many arrows at once is because the entire time it's on that frame, which can be, multiple fractions of a second, it's going to keep spawning these things. Whenever you want to have something just happen at a single time, you can add a trigger once while true to the conditions. If I double click over here on the left, go to my system, and then scroll down a little past halfway, you should find trigger once while true, which means that even if this stuff is true for a couple different ticks, it'll only happen one time. That should fix the multiple projectiles. Looks good. We can also decide where the projectile is going to come out from. And to do that, we have to go over to our test layout. Double click on your character. We're going to use this tool. This is the image point tool. Now, by default, we'd have an origin point here. You should leave the origin point alone. What the origin point does is it aligns all the different frames of your animation. So if you accidentally move it, you'll have one frame where your character just like jumps somewhere else. You can always fix that. It's an easy fix. If you accidentally move your origin point, you can just go to any other frame, any other animation, and just right click, apply to whole animation, or to all animations actually is more useful, and set it back to where it was. But let's avoid using that. So instead, we're going to make a new image point. We should do this on our attack animation. So I'm going to go over to my attack 1. I'm I'm going to go to the frame that shows when my projectile should be emerging. And I'm going to right click up here underneath where it says origin point and add a new image point. Now we have to remember what we call this. So I'm going to name it something I'll remember. I'm going to call this one arrow. You can call it whatever you want, but that's an easy thing for me to remember here. And we'll see that there's a little red square right here. That represents where this projectile is going to come out from. So you can decide, okay, I want the projectile to come out from like right here, perhaps. Now this will only be on that single frame. If I go to frame 4 or frame 6, it's not there. It's only on frame 5. So what I might do is actually right click and hit apply to whole animation. So that way it's on all the different frames, just in case I need it there. And I can see like, okay, the arrow point is right here on frame 4. And on frame 5, I can kind of keep it consistent, to kind of decide where you want it to come out from. Cool. So put it exactly where you want the projectile to shoot from and go ahead and close it. Now over here, if I double click on my arrow, that origin point is going to line up with the origin point of my projectile. So if I go to the origin point tool, here's my origin point. I can say like, okay, I want that to be like right in the middle, or maybe on mine, I'm going to put it right at the tip of the arrow. That's going to align with wherever you put your image point. So this thing and this thing will be lining up. Now, if I go back over my core event sheet, we can go to this action that we just created, the one that says spawn arrow on layer 0 at image point 0. Instead of image point 0, I can change that to, in quotation marks, whatever I just named that image point. I named mine arrow. Yours might be a different word. Whatever you just named your image point, which again is right over here under your attack, that's the name that you want to use here, in quotation marks. Cool. So now it'll make it on image point arrow. Let's try it out. There it goes. Lines up. You can always adjust that, move your image point around to make it right where you want it to emerge. Now, the other thing we're going to do here is we're going to make it so that the arrow aims towards my mouse's location. So what I can do is I can add an event to character attack, and this is going to be for my arrow. Now, I want this to happen as soon as the arrow is created. So the second that it's like spawned into existence, I'm going to set the angle to follow my mouse. So I'm going to go down to on created. So the conditions whenever a new arrow is created, I'm going to add an action. I'm going to go to my arrow, and under the bullet behavior, there's an option for set angle of motion. I'm going to set the angle of motion to this expression. I'm going to type in the word angle. And then what I need to do is in parentheses, I have to put the X and Y location of the arrow and then the X and Y location of the mouse. It's the X and Y location of the object and the X and Y location of where you want it to shoot towards. So what I do is I type in the word arrow, which is the name of my object, right? That's the name of my projectile. Arrow.x, arrow.y, there's a comma in between. So arrow.x, comma, arrow.y, comma, mouse.x, comma, mouse.y. And then close parentheses. So it's the name of our projectile object, X and Y, and then the name of the mouse, X and Y. When you do that, it'll set the angle to follow wherever your mouse is the second that it's created. So you can kind of aim your projectile towards your mouse location. Great. Now that only works if you're standing still. When I go to my running animation, it doesn't happen. And the reason why is because we've only told it to do this stuff if it's playing the attack 1 animation. We can actually copy and paste this whole event and change this to be the run and attack animation, and it should work. If you want to copy and paste an event, what you can do is click over here on the left side, use the right mouse button, and you can click on copy. Then you can go down. Usually I'll just go to like whatever my last event was. So like this bottom event, right click, paste, and you might have to click allow, and it just pastes it right below it. So now I have a copy of the same event. And this time I can just adjust a couple parameters to make it work for my run and attack animation. In this case, instead of it checking to see if attack 1's playing, what if I check to see if attack and run is playing? Now we might need to adjust the frames. If I go to my sprite and look at attack run, I want this to come out on frame 3, and then I have it happening twice within my run cycle. So it should come up out on run on frame 3 and on frame 8. So I'm going to do when it's on animation frame 3, then it'll shoot out. And I'm going to copy and paste this again and do one for on frame 8. So I have a couple different versions now. When run and attack is playing on 3, it'll spawn an arrow. When attack and run is playing on 8, it'll spawn an arrow. Now the last thing we have to do here is we tell it to come out on image point arrow, but we haven't added an image point arrow to our attack and run yet. So I'm going to go over to my attack and run animation. I'm going to be on the image point tool. I'm going to right click, add image point. I'm going to call it arrow. I'm going to apply this to the whole animation. So I have it in all my different frames. And I can decide where it's going to be. So I'm going to kind of line it up. I'm going to say, okay, it's right there. And just kind of guess where you want it to be. You can even just kind of line it up. Like I know I want it to be right at the tip of the arrow. So I'm going to put it there and then apply that to the whole animation. So it'll be in the right place for all the different frames. Because sometimes that's easier. Kind of line it up, put it where you want it to be on your attack and run animation. Make sure you've named it the same thing again, because that name has to match up with this name. Great. Let's hit play. It looks good. It works. All right. Now we're going to add one more thing for this video. We're going to add our other attack. We're going to use the other mouse button, the right mouse button, to trigger the attack too. So let's do that. I'm going to add this to the character attack group as well. I'm going to add an event. The condition is going to be for the mouse. This time mouse button is down, but I'm going to use the right mouse button. I'm going to add an action, go to my player, set the animation to attack 2. Try that out, see if it works. Doesn't work. And the reason why is just like with the earlier one, this is only going to work if this stuff is not telling it to like be idle at the same time. So we can do either method. We can either just deactivate the whole group or set it up so we have like a running animation. Since we don't have a running animation for this, we can just deactivate the whole group. When the right mouse button is down, we'll set it to attack 2 and we'll deactivate the movement group. So add action, go to system, go to set group active and change it to character, not character attack, character movement, deactivated. This way, when it's playing the attack 2 animation, it won't move and it won't do the idle animation. But the problem is, just like before, if we do that once, it gets stuck. Right now I can't move. So we want to make it so that after the attack is finished, after the animation for attack 2 is done, then we go back to activating the character movement group and putting our player in the idle animation. So for this event, the condition is going to be when the player on finished, attack 2, add action, go to the system, set group active, character movement, activated. Now that should fix it. Good. And as long as you hold it down, you keep doing the attack animation, and then when you're done, it goes back to the idle. Now for this one, we're not going to do one where you can run and attack, right? So if I'm running and I press the attack button on the right mouse button, it stops to do the attack, and then it goes back to running afterwards. Now there's one more thing we have to add for this. We haven't done this before. All this stuff that we've done in our previous projects has been like shooting out a projectile. And eventually we're going to add a life system for the enemies. So when our enemies get hit, they get destroyed. That's easy to do when we have a projectile. We can just say like, okay, when the projectile of the arrow hits the enemy, then destroy the enemy. But what about if there is no projectile? For something like this, where I'm digging a shovel, yours might be a punch or a sword or whatever it is. We have to do something else to say like, whenever this thing hits the enemy, that's when the enemy is destroyed. Because right now we just have our character. And if our character hits the enemy, then our character takes damage, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to add something called a hitbox. And a hitbox is basically, it's like a projectile, but it doesn't go anywhere. It just sits right in front of where the attack is happening, and it represents where the damage is going to be done. So I'm going to go over to my test layout. I'm going to right click. I'm going to insert a new object. It's going to be a sprite. I'm going to call this player hitbox. You can call it whatever you want. Player hitbox makes sense for me. And I'll typically just fill this in with a color. We're going to keep it simple for now. I'm just going to fill it in as a red square. And that's it. The player's never going to see the sprite. It's something that only we're going to see. So it can look like whatever. And that's probably too big, so I'm going to shrink it down. We want it to represent like where the damage is going to be done when our player's attacking. So it's going to like pop up right here, and you can kind of adjust the size to represent like where the damage takes place. Now, over in my core event sheets, what I'm going to say is when the player is playing the attack 2 animation, I'm going to spawn the player hitbox exactly where the damage is being done. So I'm going to add an event. I'm going to say when my player is playing the attack 2 animation, then add an action, and my player is going to spawn another object, hitbox. So it's kind of just like spawning the arrows, except the hitbox doesn't go anywhere. It doesn't have the bullet behavior. So if I hit play, I do the attack animation, it spawns the box, and the box just kind of sits there. Now the box is in the wrong spot, right? It's right in the middle of my body, and I want it to be right where like my attack is happening, which is more in this area over here. So we're going to do the same thing with the image points again. I'm going to double click on my player. I'm going to go to attack 2. I'm going to go to the image point tool. I'm going to make a new image point. I'm going to call this one attack. You can call it whatever you want. Just make sure it's something you remember. I'm going to call it attack. I'm going to right click and apply it to the whole animation. So now in every frame, we have the attack hitbox. We want to put this exactly where we want it to be in each frame. Now, just like before, I have some anticipation frames, right? I can actually even get rid of this frame, but I have these anticipation frames before the attack happens. And the actual damage doesn't really happen until like my actual, my smear, my motion blur and all that stuff. So I can kind of decide where these are going to be. I want to have my damage be done like right here, right where the shovel is. And I can kind of move that exactly where I want it to be. And in these frames, I might not necessarily even need it. So I'm going to leave it just where it is for now. But on 4, 5, and 6, the image point is right there. You have a different animation. So you're going to decide how you want that to sit. Now, over my core events, I'm going to have to tell the hitbox to spawn on that image point. I'm going to do quotation marks and whatever we just named it. I named mine attack. And again, it's whatever name you used here. Great. Now if I hit play, perform the attack, you can see that it makes the boxes that follows where the hit point is. Now you might not want the hitbox to be across the entire animation. On my anticipation frames, I don't really want to be making a hitbox in the middle of my body. So what we can do is we can actually add another condition over here. And we could say that should only happen on certain frames. Like for example, on mine, I only want that to happen after frame 3, right? Frame 0, 1, and 2, and 3, no hitbox. And then frame 4, 5, 6, I want the hitbox to be there. Yours is probably different. You probably have less anticipation frames. So maybe you want to skip frame 0, but you want the hitbox to pop out on frames 1, 2, and 3, or whatever it might be. But kind of take a look at what the numbers are. I'm going to make it so the hitbox happens after frame 3. So I'm going to go over to my core events, and I'm going to add another condition over here. And I'm going to say that this should only happen when the player compare frames when the frame is greater than frame 3. Now again, yours is going to be different. Don't do the same numbers. Don't do greater than 3 because you might not even have that many frames. If you only have a 4-frame animation, that's not going to work, right? So you want to make sure that you use the number that makes sense for your animation. Maybe that's frame 1. Maybe it's frame 2. Mine just happens to be frame 3. Cool. So that's where the damage will be. Whenever I do that, if the red box hits where the enemies are, that's where the damage will be done. You can also adjust how big your hitbox is here. Now, we don't want the hitboxes to stay there forever, though. We want to make them pop up and then quickly disappear. So let's add that. What I'm going to do is I'm going to add an event that says when the hitbox on created. So as soon as the hitbox is spawned, then the action is going to be, I want to wait just a fraction of a second and then have the hitbox be destroyed. I want it to just pop up for a brief moment of time, not to sit there forever. So I'm going to add an action, go to System, go to the wait down at the bottom. I'm going to say I want it to wait for, let's say 0.1 seconds. And then after it waits for 0.1 second, add action, go to the hitbox, and destroy. So when it's created, it takes 0.1 seconds of just existing, and then it destroys itself. That way our hitboxes don't just last forever. The hitbox will only represent where the damage is done to that enemy while the attack is taking place. The last thing I'm going to add here is I want to make it so my player can't see the hitbox. The hitbox should not be visible to the player, right? That's just for us. So an easy way to do that is if you go over to the test layout and you make sure that your hitbox is clicked on. Don't double click, but just make sure it's selected. Over here on the left panel, you'll see an option for initially visible. If that's checked, that makes sure it's visible to the player. But if it's unchecked, it's invisible to the player. It still exists, but they can't see it. So if you uncheck that box, you'll no longer see the hitbox spawn, but it is still there. And if you ever need to go back and check it, you can just click that again and it'll pop right back up. All right, cool. We're gonna add a little bit more to this once we have our enemies have a life system so that the hitbox does damage to the enemy, the arrow does damage to the enemy. I think for now, we have a pretty good foundation for our attacks. We'll leave it there. Thanks for joining. And don't forget to save your project before you close it. Okay, I'll see you next time.